Okay. Well, thanks for showing up. I'm Joseph Csicsila, and I am asked to moderate this afternoon's. Well, it's not a presentation, is it? So this conversation about Ben's work on Pudd'n'head Wilson. For those of you who are not familiar with Ben, he is editor at the Mark Twain Project. His scholarly superpower seems to be dealing with unruly texts in Twain's canon. So he has, to his credit, the monumental three-volume autobiography, the recently published edition of Pudd'n'head Wilson, and he just shared with us that he's going to be taking on Following the Equator next, I believe. Is that right?
That's right.
So
More.
That's our guy, center of attention this afternoon. How do you want to do this, Ben? Do you want to talk just a little bit about the project to lay some context for those of us who may not have gotten to the or go straight to questions?
To the required readings?
Yeah.
Sure. First of all, I should point out that I didn't do it alone, that I do all of this work in the context of the Mark Twain Papers and Project, which is, you all know what it is, and I don't need to give my talk about that. But all of this work is done in an environment where I'm drawing on the work of people going back to the 1960s, collected in our vaults and in our documentary files, which is it's an incredible thing to be able to wander into the vault and say, well, what have we got on this? I mean, we will have something on it. And in all cases, I'm standing on the shoulders of the people who have been working there and laboriously saving their work. So Pudd'n'head Wilson, what should I talk about? Should I say what the edition is like, or how the edition was generated, or it's?
Well, give us your elevator speech.
It's a little rusty. Rusty elevator. Beware. Well, this is something I proposed to do back in, I think, 2017, when the project was applying for the latest in its series of successful NEH grants. Yes, and there's a story there too. Of course, we have been deprived of our NEH grant, of the NEH grant that we applied for in the last year, which was a grant for 3 years. And like nearly all NEH grants, it has of course been canceled by Doge. So that's a whole other story in itself. But at the time, there was no such cloud on the horizon. And when Bob asked the collected editors in 2017 what we thought, it was time to add a new. We had published something, and it was time to add a new major work to our proposal. And I suggested Pudd'n'head Wilson, and Mike Frank, my co-editor, a former colleague there, turned to me and said, "You've got to be kidding." There was just he was just horrified well, it's it's a famous scholarly problem. Like we were saying pre-session here, the leading textual authority on Pudd'n'head Wilson, which is Herschel Parker, had said that it couldn't be edited. In fact, he said it couldn't be read, and so it's questionable. I thought that was questionable, and I guess I was feeling fractious and thought, well, I'll bet we could do it. I mean, anything can be edited. It's just a question of whether the result is going to be satisfactory or not. I suppose he meant that it wasn't going to work, not that it couldn't be attempted. So it's a fascinating thing. It clearly needed to be done. Everybody who reads about Pudd'n'head Wilson in any depth knows that it was a curiously convoluted composition, that Clemens found himself rewriting it and recasting it, and not once, as it turns out, but twice, majorly reconceiving the work and producing what in effect were different versions. And this really struck at me because when I was much younger and was learning about scholarly editing in graduate school, this was a period when Shakespeare editions held the stage, held the page, held the page, and all the talk was about different Shakespeare having authorized different versions of King Lear, different versions of Hamlet in quarto and in folio, and how much. The question was, can the traditional editorial process accommodate a situation where we find that there's more than one authoritative version of a work? And I thought that this was a chance to, going up again to 2017, I felt that Pudd'nhead Wilson was a Shakespearean chance to do versions, to produce the way Mark Twain finished it first and left it for 6 months before being convinced by other people that he ought to rewrite it. And I thought the two versions should be produced alongside each other. And so it proved. And I think the reception of it has been really warm and excellent. And I read the reviews as they come out, and it's had some good ones. And I hope it's going to be. I hope it's going to change, really, at a fundamentally affect criticism, scholarship on Pudd'nhead Wilson, because all the time for the last, however many decades, if you dip into the scholarship, you end up hearing about this manuscript at the Morgan Library in New York, which is the original Pudd'nhead Wilson, and no one had really. Very few people had the chance to read it. Now, Anne Ryan had read it, and I know that because she was good enough to share some samizdat images of pages of the manuscript with me, which were very much needed.
Well, it's also why I needed like 6 months of therapy after reading that. I don't know how you survived, honestly, but go on.
Well, what makes it really pathetic is that this is not what I'm good at. I mean, I don't mean editing. I mean following a plot. I have grave difficulty. This is a total sidebar. This is not part of the elevator speech. This is part of the water cooler speech. I have grave difficulty following plots, so that when I'm watching TV with my girlfriend, I am always the one going, I thought they killed that guy. No, he's still alive. Oh, this is a different guy. So I'm not good at it. I can just follow the plot of a sitcom episode, and so just the thought of trying to understand, and I had never understood the plot of Pudd'nhead Wilson, the published version. I had never successfully understood it. Where everybody was, and who knew what at what time, and then you complicate it by going into its compositional history, during the course of which Clemens kept changing his mind about how it was going to go and who was going to know what, and what did he mean by that when he said, when Tom doesn't want to be discovered in chapter 16, Clemens radically changed what was the secret. What he doesn't want discovered changes between the two versions. At first, he's afraid of being exposed as a thief, and secondly, in the second place, he's afraid of being exposed as black. It's amazing to me that this was done at all, and I included as an appendix the hard work that I put in analyzing the Berg manuscript and the Morgan manuscript and breaking down their events into tabular form, which is maybe will never help anybody, but having done it so that I could understand, I did want to tart it up and place it in the volume. Is that enough to start with? Yeah, more than enough, right?
Why don't I start with the questions, if that's okay, and I'll maybe be a little provocative. So who do you think is who has done the most damage to Pudd'nhead Wilson's reputation in Twain's canon, or maybe just generally speaking as an American literary text? So I'll give you three. So is it the editors at Century? Is it Twain himself for moving through drafts and trying to pull things out, pull things apart? And three, is it maybe Herschel Parker for his declaration that it was an unedited, editable text?
That's a great question, really. Who did the most well, you're right in saying that all three of them are deleterious.
Yeah.
I don't think that many people I don't think anyone has really been disconcerted or steered away from the book by Herschel Parker. I think he was being very provocative, and I think that that's the common currency of criticism, and he had every right to. I think you could call it a flourish, although it must also be related, as we were saying earlier, to his decision to relinquish the editing of the text for the Mark Twain series. Who did the most damage? Well, Clemens did substantial damage to the book. Well, not everyone will agree about that, and that was the whole purpose of getting revised and unrevised versions between the same covers, so that people could form their own opinions. There's no question that in some respects it's a botch, and that the ghost, I think, for criticism, the ghost of the Pudd'nhead Wilson we could have had and should have had will always be there, and we'll never have it. But I think it's a precondition of Pudd'nhead Wilson as we have it, that it could have been different. One of the things I found, by the way, most fascinating was that everyone has noted, well, a lot of people have said, that Pudd'nhead Wilson starts off as Clemens's brilliantly written and incisive account of the slavery South and the kind of small town he grew up in, and race relations, and then he loses his way. I've read lots of people who said it starts so well, but he loses his way. What you realize after you've investigated it is that those are the last written parts. Those opening chapters of Pudd'nhead Wilson, as we have it, are the last written parts of the book. So he had just found his way when he was writing those. Of course, he only had to write 6 chapters. They were prequel to the part he had written 2 years or a year earlier. So I think that's really worth knowing. And it's not that he lost his attention wandered. It's that the story gradually focused his attention, but then it tapers off in a certain, so some people say. And I don't think anyone can do a lot of damage to Pudd'nhead Wilson. I think it's going to, people have been bad-mouthing it since it was published. And I guess that will continue. But there it is on our shelves. even with all the bad mouthing, it secured over the course of the 20th century, it secured the position kind of number two Mark Twain book, which is pretty impressive when you consider how much it seems to bother people.
Yeah. And
Thanks. So I just wanted to say, I think Ben's being slightly too humble here, because I mean, I went through not just the Morgan manuscript, and this was years ago. And I think, well, Ben, right around the time I think you were starting to think about doing this, and I had read Harry Wanham's piece that said, which is a really good essay on the Morgan manuscript. When you read the introduction that Ben did, which I think is extraordinary, if I were teaching a class on Pudd'n'head at this point, I would start having them read that introduction, which actually does give this really nice plot without trying to sort of even out the rough edges. And then when you go through the entire sort of dialogue, and that's really what I feel like you get all these, it's operatic, you get all these voices, you know, the text that you wish Twain had written, the texts multiple that he did write, it's very postmodern. You know, there's a kind of confusion there, but when you read Ben's introduction, it's just, it's really an accomplishment. And so if you haven't had a chance to do that, everybody should read that introduction. And I feel like the volume is just so smart. And so I guess if I had a question, my question would be, and I know a little bit about the backstory of this, what was it like deciding to put the Morgan manuscript first in the volume and then followed by the revised? Because I think you got a little pushback on that, didn't you?
Oh yeah, I did. Not within the Mark Twain project, but but we did get some pushback on it. From the reviewer of from the who was it? From an outside reviewer that UC Press sent the book to, so it could be approved by the academic senate. There was, I think it could really have been predicted, but the outside reviewer was really indignant that the Morgan manuscript had been given place at the front of the volume. And it was in vain for me to protest that I had put the two versions in chronological order. We had put the first version first and the second version second. But I hadn't been ready for how much pushback I would get from just the conservative. There's a conservative impulse that says you're trying to unseat the Pudd'n'head Wilson that we've had all along. You're trying to unseat the novel that, as I've been teaching it for 35 years. You know, and it's an understandable impulse. But I don't see, once you've decided to make the manuscript version. And I never would have done this, by the way, if it had been a fragment or something. And you find it described as a draft in a lot of the writing on the subject. And the Morgan manuscript is no draft. It's a completed novel. It's a little cavalier about the way it ties up some of its plot ends, but that actually that's an aspect of it that survives into the published version. It is, so they're both cavalier about how they tie up loose ends that Clemens has lost interest in. And you all know this is one of Clemens's weaknesses as a craftsman, is that if he doesn't want to deal with something, he says, well, and then they all fell down the well and they were drowned, and that it can't be helped, and dear reader, let's move on. You know, sort of. I think it's whimsical and funny, but it could certainly be called bad craftsmanship if you were Henry James or something, George Eliot, you'd regard it as, you know, a little casual. So yeah, I was not prepared for that, but we got through it all right because the academic senate took our point. over the point of the outside reviewer. Yeah.
Judith?
Oops. I can't hear her.
There we go. Oh, no, there you go.
Okay, I think I'm finally unmuted. Ben, I was thinking when you said, well, in the originally he was worried about being exposed as a thief, but later, you know, in the Morgan manuscript, he's much more worried about being exposed as Black. Seems like one of the key questions to know, and because I read your apparatus, some of the apparatus, including today's assigned reading, but I haven't read the manuscript version. If we take that as the most important text, you know, is the one we would probably teach now, because that's the one that's most comprehensive, and it was his original intention before being usurped by various publishers, or overruled by publishers. What are some of the other changes that you noted that you think really alter the meaning and the significance of the book?
Well, this is really tricky to talk about off the cuff, especially because Clemens, it would be one thing if there had been the manuscript version and then that was revised into the published version. But the changes I was talking about there are actually internal changes within the Morgan manuscript version. That is to say, he starts it out with Tom actually being Tom, and actually and actually being white, and then there's the recasting of the so-called recasting of the story, which he performed at a certain point in December 1892, and that is when he decided to make Tom secretly Roxy's son. So this is the big change. But the trouble is that we can't. That's a change within the gestation of the book, of the manuscript. It can't be read. It has to be. It can only be read by reading the textual apparatus and seeing the rejected and altered readings that he did as he went along. So there's no way to hand anybody a version of the story that is a proto version of the story. The proto versions of the story have to be excavated, and the only way to present them to somebody is to do what I've tried to do, and do it in an essay, the introduction. Our introductions are, of course, not introductions. They're they start on page 561 and they're 100 pages long, and they contain a lot of material that is not introductory at all. It's definitely, after material.
Summative, yeah.
Yeah, it's supplement. They should be called supplement, perhaps. Or in the Melville edition, these things are called a historical essay. The Northwestern Newberry Melville edition doesn't have introductions. It has historical notes, and they call it a historical note. It's still an introduction, but I've sometimes thought we should call it that, but I'm pretty sure that the press wouldn't like that. I'm pretty sure they want an introduction, and in fact, we've often had we've had pressure from UC Press to put them at the beginning, but I think in this case that would have been fatal. I can't imagine. For one thing, the press wanted to sell this as an edition that would be purchased for classroom use. So it can't have a 100-page scholarly introduction at the front. That's flat. And you're asking me for some of the other ways in which he recast it, and unfortunately, it's been like I finished work on Pudd'n'head Wilson in 2022, and now I feel, and I don't feel it takes so long to get them through the publication process, and so I'm sorry I can't dredge anything up right now because
Well,
I'm
let me
panicking.
reframe the question then a little bit, which would be, so, Clemens famously called the result of the separation of the two narratives, the Pudd'nhead versus the twin there, he called it a literary Caesarean operation.
Right.
So if those are the texts we know, how do you see what we gain as readers rather than scholars from the
Oh, well, up until I think I know what you mean. Up until now, if you wanted to have some sense of what the manuscript, the Morgan manuscript version consisted of, you had to kind of read the, you sort of had to read those extraordinary twins and slot in large, chunks from the normal published Pudd'nhead Wilson, because that's how Clemens creates it. All that material where the twins are in their original unseparated condition. And I think lots of scholars must have had to do this sort of. I know that I would have, if I'd had to, I would have probably cannibalized a copy of the book and tried to slot the texts together the way they had originally been. Clemens got a sort of those extraordinary twins was originally something I found out and I hadn't known. Those extraordinary twins was originally meant to be a magazine article. Clemens was looking at his rejected, all the rejected bits of Pudd'nhead Wilson that he had to take out in revising it so that the twins were separated. And one day it must have looked like a saleable property to him, and it was a saleable property, and the Century magazine actually wanted it and accepted it. And then he got a better price from his book publisher, Francis Bliss. He got a better price from him to add it to the book as a kind of farce, as a kind of afterpiece. So I think, the obvious gain here, Judith, is that you can now read them. Why all the shilly-shallying about? Let's just be able to read a transcription of the Morgan manuscript from start to finish. Read it the way it actually reads. And then too, the text I've created of the final version is by no means the same as what we've been reading. The Norton Critical Edition did some good work in restoring a lot of spellings and punctuation. Berger, the editor of that volume, restored the spellings and punctuations of the manuscript to the wording, to the verbal content of the published book, which had been completely purged of Clemens's spelling and punctuation as usual. So that was good work, but my research showed that Berger hadn't done enough in the Norton edition to reverse the censorship that had been visited upon the book in publication. So the most visible thing about this edition is that it contains the Morgan text, the manuscript text, but less visible, but to me just as important, is the re-edited version of the final text. And they took out references to flatulence. They took out references. They took out slang. If you've read about what was done to Huckleberry Finn when it appeared in the Century same magazine, the Century. In Huckleberry Finn, it's clear that the editors purged it of some of the most inoffensive words. I mean, they wouldn't let Huck say "by jings." He couldn't swear by jings. It was like, good heavens. And I found extensive evidence that the same was done to the Century Pudd'nhead Wilson. And since the Century Pudd'nhead Wilson is our... Here's what I have to say. Let's see. Let's get it together, Ben. In the case of Huckleberry Finn, large parts of it appeared in the Century, but they don't make any difference because when the book came to be published, that's not what was printed from. They printed naturally from Clemens's manuscript. The problem with Pudd'n'head Wilson is that when it came to be printed, it was printed from the Century magazine text, and there was no opportunity to go back to a purer text, which Clemens could have supplied. He could have let the Century he had let the Century have its way. I think mostly with censoring the text, but he could have gone back and started anew with a newly prepared typescript to give to his book publisher, but he didn't. He was overseas. He was living in 4 places at once. He was living in Bavaria and Berlin and Florence, and just it's something I had to track all the way through the introduction, and it's maddening. You know, I've tried to write about literature, and he keeps moving.
Well,
And
my takeaway from what you're telling us is that there really are at least 3 interesting thematic and textual differences. One is that we're going to get a more vibrant, real Mark Twain prose out of this because the censorship has been overruled. Another is that we're going to have a more rich twin story because we have the 2 sets of twins put back in a much more expansive way because we have all the stuff from the Extraordinary Twins that was taken out of it now put into the Pudd'n'head as a counterpoint to the racial twins that we have in Valet de Chambre or Chambers and Tom. And so those are really 2 really big things. And then of course we have the additional plot elements that are put in there. So I think I really appreciate your expansive answer because I think it gives us a sense of what riches there are from a textual and interpretive and narrative context, not just from an editorial one.
thank you.
Susan had a question that she put into the chat. Do you want to ask that question, Susan?
Hi, Ben. Thanks. This is fascinating. I think we're both sitting here being interested. You started out by saying there was a ghost text that we should have, Twain could have. What does that ghost text look like?
Everybody gets their own ghost. Everybody, your ideal version of a book is your ideal version of a book. So it's got to vary a lot. But I'm sure you're familiar with what Leslie Fiedler wrote about Pudd'n'head Wilson in the mid-50s.
Refresh me.
It was some time ago.
With a while.
He said that we'd been cheated of the Pudd'n'head Wilson that we ought to have because Clemens, wussed out and didn't write the savage, the way he describes it is just hallucinatory. Fiedler could just be trying to describe the Morgan manuscript, which he never looked at. But he's not describing the Morgan manuscript. He makes you think maybe that he's describing a book Clemens actually wrote and then suppressed, but he isn't. He's talking about the book that Clemens should have written, and it would have been this kind of carnivalesque explosion on racial and political, of subversive racial and political activity. It would have been the Pudd'n'head Wilson that Leslie Fiedler deserved, and he didn't get. He was bilked of it.
Yeah, well, there were a lot of 50s and 60s critics who basically wanted everybody to write the book they think they should write. So I think that was Fiedler's problem. So
This
what
is this this is this is this is often found in book reviewing, I think.
Yes, absolutely. And manuscript reviewing as
Yes,
well.
and in manuscript reviewing,
Yeah.
they've done a
But-
pretty good job. But here's what I would have done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Ben, what would be your ghost book? And I will get off.
My my I guess my Phantom Pudd'nhead Wilson would be one which dealt more thoroughly in what we keep saying it is, which is a book of corrosive political insight about racial oppression and racial disharmony and race mixing and American life. I think we always say, I mean, I don't, I don't anymore. People have said that Pudd'nhead Wilson is Clemens's most intrepid and searing look at American slavery and its legacy. I think the truth is that Pudd'nhead Wilson should have been Mark Twain's most intrepid and searing look at the legacy of slavery, or at, you know, it in those early chapters, which I've explained are the late chapters. It's all there. It's but as you know, generation after generation has read the book and found it after the amazing setup of the Tom and Chambers situation, which has real promise for a mythic quality, for you know, something really special. That it continues to be a good book, but it sort of seems to dwindle into a melodrama. I basically agree with that outlook, and if it could have been done again, you know, if it were to be redone, then I guess I've told you what I think is missing.
Matt had a question about Leslie Fiedler, and it sounds like it might have been answered, but Matt, if you want to expand on that, or maybe we can just hear your baritone voice.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry I can't join you visually, but my camera's not working. But yeah, I think Ben really did answer my question, which was whether he felt that it lived up in some ways to Leslie's hopes. But a little bit earlier, I was going to ask, and maybe this is in some ways related, how you might see a teaching edition of the Morgan manuscript altering the way that Pudd'nhead works in the classroom. As I was reading, I found myself really hoping that that would be in the works, because I think it would be a much more teachable text, I actually believe, in the Morgan manuscript version.
Oh, well, hi, Matt, and thanks for the question. It's you touch on something very near my heart, but it's also it's a sorrow I think that's very near my heart. All along, we thought there should be a classroom edition or general readers edition of the kind that, as you know, we've been doing in the Mark Twain Library series. There's none of every time that we've published one of the major books of Mark Twain, with the exception of the autobiography, which posed problems in this respect. We've done a classroom edition, and we call it the Mark Twain Library. Typically, we just we remove the scholarly introduction, leave the annotation, remove all the textual apparatus, and print the text. And these have been successful books, but UC Press has lost interest in them and doesn't want to do them anymore. They actually are among, I can't resist pointing out that the Huck and the Tom Sawyer of the library editions are among the UC Press's 5 best-selling books of all time. But, and in any case, there does not seem, this was our original plan, was to produce the major edition for scholars and then a editio minor for the classroom. The UC Press didn't like it, and they said they wanted to sell the big book as the classroom edition.
Wow.
And so a lot of decisions were made in the course of production that reflected that. And that's why they priced it really low, hoping that it would be adopted in colleges and high schools. But I don't believe it has been, and I had never thought it was likely to be. So if things change, we haven't, Bob has said we're not giving up on a classroom, a library edition of Pudd'n'head Wilson. That raises the question of what would be in it, even if we can do it. You feel that it should be, I guess, the manuscript text. I think it should probably be the re-edited version of the text, the re-edited version of the published text, actually. After all, it is the later, it does embody the latest decisions that Mark Twain made about it, even if some of those decisions were coerced by, circumstances and publishers. So
I guess
the fact
I
is,
guess my thinking.
the fact is we could put both of them in again, and it would still be a very short book. This is not a long novel in either version.
I guess my thinking, Ben, was that there are lots of teaching editions of the over edited century text available already, and and the Morgan manuscript is such a dramatic departure, and I find the refusion of the twins with Pudd'n'head to be so interesting and so inviting for teaching purposes that's why I was prone to think of the Morgan manuscript as the text that we would want into greater circulation.
You're probably right. I feel like in editing a book, I get far too close to it, and it becomes something much too close to me. And I have the feeling that all my aesthetic impulses are thrown off completely by the process of immersion. So I'll bet you're right, and I'll bet that's the way it would go. It would have that is the version of the text, as you say, which has a market to itself, and makes sense. I hope we can do it.
Anne?
This is just to throw in an additional possible, if you did this imaginary, the Morgan, I mean, I hope that it would include all those textual emendations, because for me, that's an additional.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
When I go through those, I think Susan had asked, like, well, what's the ghost text? What are we missing? And the Tom Driscoll that comes out of those emendations is terrifying. I mean,
yes.
And I think that he's just this like delicious nastiness. There's a phrase in it, and I think it's one of the textual emendation. It's like he's an N-word with a grievance. And I was like, that sounds like it should be a hip hop song, right? This guy is coming out. He's
NWG.
like, right, straight out of Hannibal. He's coming at us, and I think students would be fascinated by the psychological, the revelation of the artist at work when you see him crossing out and cutting things that were like, don't cut that. That's fantastic. Put it back in. I mean,
see, you're doing it. Now you're Now you're helping. Now you're building up the Pudd'n'head Wilson that we should have had.
I knew I was going to do something today.
There's no way not to do this. I think it's amazing. But I agree with you. And maybe it could be we could have the text of the final text of the manuscript and an appendix of the more substantial rejections the stuff that was too strong meat even for Clemens. remember that he always wrote things. I remember now that he always wrote something, and he says he wrote something in each book that would be too horrible, and would have to, and that Livy and the girls would take great delight in pouncing on and expunging for him. And every so often I've wondered which passage in the Morgan manuscript is that one. Possibly it is the grasshopper passage, the passage that he wrote in which Tom has just learned that he overhears a conversation which lets him know that he has been reinstated as his uncle's heir, and he celebrates by torturing and monologuing to a grasshopper, which he tortures to death. And it's
pretty fun.
It's pretty fun.
Yeah.
It's goth.
Ben, you want to talk a little bit about the sleuthing that you did with chapter 18? I don't remember the particulars, but it sticks out in my mind as one of those maybe discoveries that Judith pointed to in her question. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Okay, so there were UK and US first editions, and there was something to do with chapter 18. They were waiting for, in the UK, they were waiting for the next installments.
Oh, yes.
You want to talk about that a little bit?
I'll try. That was a discovery. Is it my discovery?
I think you should claim it.
Yeah, it's my discovery. No. Actually, Sidney Berger in his research for the Norton edition had noticed that there was something wrong, something going on at that point in the text, but I don't think he explained it correctly. He actually got a journal article out of it, but I don't think he'd explained it correctly. What happens is that the collation of all the different base texts showed me that after a certain point, the compositors of the British text in London were, after chapter 18, they were following a different source from they had been setting copy from the Century magazine numbers as they came out. And then at a certain point in the text, their readings no longer tally with the Century magazine, which I had thought was their immediate source. And I realized that they were closer, that the readings I was seeing in the British edition, were now close to the manuscript. And I'm like, well, how can they be close to the manuscript? They don't have the manuscript. And then I had to put it together with I had to look at all the correspondence, and I realized that the British publisher, Chatto, had been begging Clemens's company, which was going through bankruptcy, had been begging Clemens for months to send them a complete typescript of the whole novel. And they were getting nothing from that end because it was all scattered. Charles L. Webster had packed up and gone home. Mm-hmm. And but I realized that eventually they had received a typescript, presumably, copy from the manuscript. So this is valuable. This turned out to be really valuable for the editing of those final chapters, because that gives me, if I'm right about what Chatto was setting from, then they were setting from a source that had not received the interference of the Century magazine. And the collation seemed to bear that out. And that means that as far as I'm concerned, it means that the text of those final chapters is purer and closer to, that is to say, closer to what Clemens actually wanted than any other part of the book. And it's just too bad that Chatto couldn't have had a typescript from the author earlier in the process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah,
This is
absolutely.
what this is. Yeah, actually, I'm really glad that you mentioned it because although it's a little difficult to chat about, it's my favorite thing about the whole process. It's the discovery that I enjoyed the most.
Can you remind us how much of the manuscript that would represent in the English
I
version?
think it's like a fifth of it,
Wow,
and
okay.
it's not very much. It's chapters 18 through 23 and the conclusion, if I remember correctly. Chapter numbers are a casualty of now we have two versions with two different, chapterings, and I no longer know the numbers of any of the relevant chapters. And that's one of the things I found we had to do was give explanatory notes twice. I didn't want to constantly I wanted both versions of the text to be fully annotated. And at first I was screwing around with cross references, like, for the note on this place, see the note on the analogous place in the other version. But there was no need to save that much space because there aren't that many notes anyhow. So I just printed two different note sections, mostly the same, of course.
So it looks like we've got about 5 minutes left. Any questions out there lingering that folks want to ask? Okay, well, maybe we'll just thank Ben for his time and all of his work. Joe, are you taking over moderator duties from Jim since he left, or do you want me to just wave goodbye and send us into happy hour? Okay. Well, I hope to see many of you in Boston next month. And if not, you'll receive information about the next of these Zoom chats. Judith has a question.
Well, I mean, as president of the Circle, want to remind everybody that we'll have our annual happy hour. It will probably be Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock, but Megan McNamara, whom you may know as Megan Dolly, but she goes by McNamara. Megan and Todd Thompson of the American Humor Studies Association are hard at work at finding us a venue. Apparently, a couple of years ago, we were summarily booted from our favorite space, Joe's Bar, so I think they're looking for alternatives. But anyway, that event is happening, free drinks and nasharai, snacks. So put it on your calendar.
All right, thanks, Judith.
Can I just say one more time, I just want to thank Ben for this. I feel like this volume is just such a gift, and it's so impressive, and you did a fantastic job, and well done.
Thank you on behalf of the Mark Twain Project. Thank you very much. And thank you everybody for letting me talk about it. It's wonderful. Thank you.